So you want to get divorced? Sure, it's time for you to take that husband of yours, toss him, get a new one. What you're going to want to do first, though, is make sure you go through the entire process of getting every dollar you can get by means of lawyering up and going after what's fair. Guys, if you're watching this, you're going to want to do one thing. You're going to have to watch Brokeback Mountain because you're about to get fucked. Custody of my children was the first thing that I had to deal with in this divorce process. So this goes back a number of years. My ex-wife left in December of 2019. This is when the situation happened. We had a bit of problems in our relationship at the end for about 3 months. She was, after looking back at this and seeing it from an outside perspective, it was just a means of getting out of the relationship. So she decided to leave right before Christmas of 2019. We had talked a little bit about the situation, and the sentence that I remember the most from her was, "I don't want your money, and I want to be your friend." Well, she got some people talking into her ears, and things changed a little bit. She moved to Strathmore, which is a small town just outside of Calgary. That's where her parents lived, and she moved in with them and took our kids with her. My daughter was still breastfeeding at the time, so it's hard to be a dad that says, kids stay here because they live here. I was pretty beta at the time. I was pretty sad that my marriage has ended. It was horrible for me. I didn't want to deal with this shit. And she was pretty hell-bent on this stuff. I got a proposal from her shortly after Christmas of 2019, and what it said was that the kids would reside with her in Strathmore. She had full custody of the kids, and that I would get generous visitation of no less than 3 weekends per month. The total was, with alimony, child support, and Section 7 expenses, which is daycare costs, the total was $4,043 per month. This was on about December the 28th, and my first payment was due on January 1st. Right on.
Merry Christmas, you filthy animal. And a Happy New Year.
So, you have a situation now where money and friendship, no, it became all about money and control. So this is the first thing that I had to deal with as a dad, of learning the process of what happens in this divorce. Looking back, my ex-wife had no plan whatsoever as to what she was going to do. That's why she moved in with her parents. She was driving our vehicle, which I guess I just gave to her because what the hell else was I going to do? And our kids live with her in Strathmore with her parents now. And this is my life. Interesting. When we were talking about the situation initially before she left, I had trusted that she wasn't going to do these things, which a lot of women do, which is take the kids as her own and then decide that they're mine and you're going to pay for them. I just thought, well, these are my kids. I just get them.
Right? Wrong.
So I'm from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Strathmore is a town which is located about an hour outside of Calgary, which is where she moved to. At this time, I tried to do this on a personal level a few times in the first couple of months of this situation, which was just sit her down and say, look, $4,043 a month may be considered excessive if you want me to survive, say, the next 3 months. Maybe that there's better ways to do this. Like, if you wanted to leave, maybe you should, get a job and go to work and you have a career and you have a home figured out, right? Don't you have all this stuff figured out? And it turns out, no. The situation as this lasted about 7 months in total of she had the kids and she decided when I was going to see them. In that first proposal, she had alimony at this much, child support at this much, daycare costs at this much, totaling $4,043. Now, when you see this initially, it's pretty interesting to see that you, as a dad who has provided everything up to this point for these children and for your wife, she just decides that this is now null and void and the kids are mine and you're going to pay for them and see them when she decides to see them. By April of that year, I had the kids for the Easter weekend. So this was about 3 or 4 months in, whatever it was at the time. I picked the kids up from her parents' house in Strathmore to go to my family's place for the weekend. And on that Friday, about half an hour out of town, I got this email. Now remember, this is just after COVID started, so people get things done by email now. Email is the main thing. There's no one's talking to each other. People are still kind of scared because this is back when COVID was real and scary. I got this email, and there's something just, I got this gut feeling of I should pull over and read this email with my kids in the back, who at the time are 5 and 2. And what it was is the lawsuit. You are being sued. And so it has all the situation of she had lawyered up 2 months prior, didn't tell me anything about this. And what happened was court was already booked for July of that year, of 2020. And this situation of I own the children and you're going to pay for them is moving forward. And I didn't even realize that this was happening at all. This is already filed. There's stamps from offices, and she already had this whole thing ready to go. So I have to go and lawyer up now. So when I got back home from my trip, I looked around a little bit, and through a family member, I got hooked up with this sweet little old lady named Nan. And she'd been in this business for quite a long time. It was kind of doom and gloom as far as her lawyer advice to me, which is get custody of your kids, find out what you owe her, pay her, and move on with your life. I'd been watching all these TV shows about when you have a lawyer, your lawyer's just supposed to go and sick people and just paperwork, and just fuck them up. Well, that wasn't my experience. So I learned very quickly that a man's job in court is to shut up and do the best that you can, because you're about to get fucked. And get fucked I did. After I went to this lawyer and paid her a bunch of money and a few emails back and forth, we had decided to go to what's called mediation. So this is now 6 full months after she left, maybe a little bit more. I'm still trying to get 50-50 custody, which is what I always wanted. From the time that she left and started, I'm a good dad. I want to be in my kid's life. And she decided, well, you'll do that when you jump through all my hoops and you pay up. I had been paying about $1,300 a month from the time that she left. So about 2 weeks after she left, she got her first payment from me, $1,300. It was supposed to be $800 for child support, and then the remainder, $500, whatever it was, goes towards the daycare cost. Because I thought she'd be jumping into work, and it's like, well, yeah, she's a stay-at-home mom for 2 years. It's like, well, you're going to go to work now. And turns out that that wasn't enough in her mind. So we go to this mediation thing, which is a very expensive day where each of you shows up with your lawyers at $450 per hour. And then there's a third lawyer who is the mediator that you split the cost of. So another $450 an hour. So we're both at $675 an hour. And I'm there to get 50-50 custody of my kids, however, and she's there to keep that away from me unless I do this and that and the other thing. So 50-50 custody is something that I thought you just get. Like, unless you're some abusive asshole, you were in jail, then you get that with visitation shit, where now you're trying to be a better human and you get your kids. It happens in a lot of situations, is all she has to say is that he's an abusive, threatening guy, and everybody believes her, which is the situation that I was put in. Even though she dropped her kids off to me every weekend for 6 full months. That didn't seem to be a problem, other than she didn't get paid for that, right? So it was okay for that to be dropped off on the weekends, but once I wanted to have them for the week, then we got a problem, because full custody money, shared custody money is very, very different. So back to this mediation. So we're sitting in a room. I have my lawyer, she has her lawyer, and then the third lawyer's in the middle, and he's this cool guy that's over here. And then we're going to go over there. And then we're going to go over here. And my case was the same of, why in the hell is anybody moved to Strathmore? So we live in Calgary. We've lived in Calgary the entire time. I have a home. Our kids grew up in that home. And my son was in kindergarten at the time, and then he left. He went to kindergarten in Strathmore. And her story was, the kids are settled. even though they were living at grandma's house. If Brett wants 50-50 custody, then he has to move to Strathmore and join our life that we have already made, and this is what's happening now. I'm saying, what in the shit is in Strathmore for anyone? Because it's this little hick town, and it's not really where anything of my life is going, except my ex-in-laws live there, and now my soon-to-be ex-wife and children live there, for some reason. And unless I moved, I wasn't getting 50-50. So we spent half the day arguing about that, which at $675 an hour, I do okay in the world financially, but I don't just toss around $675 an hour to buy my kids. I did that day, however. So by about 3 o'clock of that day, we're at hour 6. We now have a plan. The plan was, I am going to move to Strathmore for 1 year because my son was already booked into grade 1 for the school year, and I had to be in Strathmore by the end of August, and this is the end of June, and I'm going to be there for the entire school year, and by summer of 2021, we're going to move back to Calgary and back to my house and back to my son's old school and back to regular schedule programming. She has to live within whatever means of my house, which was the home base and all the schools and whatnot. And this is what's going to happen. So I got 50-50 custody, jumping through the hoops of, you have to go live in Strathmore for a year.
Right.
And that was it. And all of a sudden, the payments are figured out as far as that portion goes, which is just child support and Section 7 expenses, which I'll get into in a later video as to what those cover. But the main thing that we needed to deal with was daycare cost. During this time, remember this was COVID times, so there's a lot of people who jumped on the bandwagon of, I could go to work, or I could just sit on my ass and take $2,000 a month of Justin Trudeau's money and pretend that I can't work because it's too scary outside. I had an ex-wife who jumped on that like stink on shit.
Clever girl.
Anyway, in the end of June comes along. I have this deal figured out. My tab that day was whatever, 6 times 675, and I got 50-50 custody of my kids. So I go back home and I had some family there for the weekend, and like, well, guess what I'm doing? I'm moving to Strathmore in 2 months. One of the reasons that she did this is because this is a means of having control. And you'll see this throughout your process if you're going through this, is that control is just a little bit more important than the money that comes with it. Why? I don't quite understand as to what she got out of this other than a little bit of time to get a place and find out how she's going to survive in the next bit of time. So she also thought that because we're getting divorced that I was going to sell the house and that she was just going to get half the money out of it. So this was something that obviously he'll just sell the house and he'll move to Strathmore and that'll work out great. Instead, what I did was I rented my house out in Calgary and then had to get another place in Strathmore, which was at the time, this was before all this crazy inflation happened. And the cheapest option for me was to buy the cheapest house in the middle of the trailer park in Strathmore. It was a nice piece of shit, but it only cost $190,000. So because I'm going into debt coming up anyway, I thought, what about some more debt? That might be a good idea for Brett. And so I did. I got more loans coming up my ass and was able to find this place and move in within 2 months. And it was a hell of a thing because when someone just says, you can move, figure it the fuck out, they're not really sensitive to all the costs that happen in your life. Like moving, like renting all your shit out and buying something else and moving all your stuff and saying, hey, work, I'm going to be a fucking pain in the ass for the next year because I have to live in Strathmore now. And I was driving a company vehicle. I'm driving around putting all these kilometers on and all this shit. No one really was concerned about that except for me. So I had to go and deal with all this stuff, find a way to keep my job, get rid of my house over here for a year, and then buy a house over here because it was cheaper than renting a place. And I was able to do that in 2 months. But I got 50-50 custody of my children. What happens to a lot of guys here is that because of the emotional beatdown that divorce is, they accept things like, I'm just not going to get custody of my kids. And they accept a lesser. And what happens is not only the money is more, but the decision making as to where your kids live, where they go to school, is now made by the bigger, badder parent. When you're dealing with custody, make sure that you do everything in your power to be as civil as possible. Make sure that anything that you send is not going to be taken advantage of and read incorrectly. As we know in the work world now, is that text and email is just common way of communicating. You read an email for how you're feeling at that point in time. And if something like this that's quite sensitive of, I said something to baby mama, she can easily take that and just put a little word magic on there and make you out to be somebody that's a lot worse than you actually are. This happened to me so many times. So please be careful of that. Go after custody to the best of your ability. Is depending on what kind of person you are, there's all these different situations that arise as to who's going to do what and when, and who's a better parent, who's worse, who's this, who's that. I always wanted to be a dad that was in my kids' life. I've been paying for them since 6 months before they were born, and I'm going to continue to do that because that's what kind of dad I want to be. I want to be in their lives. I want to put time into them. These are my children. And especially now going through this process, it's very important that my kids have a strong male figure. Because what's happening here is, in my situation, she tried to replace me with my money. And you can do that for a while, but that father figure in the house is something that is necessary for children. And I get to say that, yeah, I fought for it. And one of the main reasons I fought for it is because I could afford to. There's a lot of guys in the world that cannot afford to fight for custody of their kids because lawyers, $4.50 an hour, you can just piss away $1,000 all over the place all the time. And depending on what kind of lawyer you use too, as to how much they talk, then you spend more money. And I'll get more into that in the next video.